Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar Expertum is hosting on HANA 2 modeling deployments to see what is changing between HANA 1 and HANA 2. My name is Dick Groenhoff. I'm a consultant at Expertum, focusing mainly on HANA development, scripting, and ETL, and business analytics. Before we start with the actual content, I have two announcements I'd like to share with you. First of all, I'd like to let you know that the session is being recorded for future use, so that people can view it later on. They don't have the time to attend today, so that you are aware of that. And there is a lot of room for question and answers. I will try to answer them as much as possible, and well, there is a number of moments in the presentation where I will have to give you the opportunity, or give the opportunity to, or I will answer questions. But you can ask questions all the time. There is a Q&A button on your Zoom screen, and you can ask all your questions there already during the session, and at the specific moments we will get to those. Okay, well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us this afternoon, this rainy afternoon. At least here it is. There's people from outside the Netherlands as well, so that's why we're doing this session in English. Welcome for you as well, and there we go. I'd like to start with telling you what we're going to cover in this session. First of all, let me say this, that I think there is a very mixed group of people available here. I see there's people who might not know anything about HANA 2 and the modeling, how it's done. So we might get a bit technical sometimes for you. But I'm sorry, that's just the nature of the topic we're going to cover. So it might be sometimes a bit too technical. On the other hand, I also see people from which I know that they already have quite an understanding of this topic. And you might think, well, maybe we should go even a little deeper. Well, that's possible. You can ask me the questions, and if they're too deep for this session, we will address them later, or we'll get back to you on those. So just up front, that is what you're going to expect. I will cover what are the key differences in HANA View modeling to what we're used to now in HANA 1 in the classic way, and in HANA 2 using the XSA way. We'll take you through a quick overview. I won't dive in too deep in for instance, all the functionality of the web IDE, but I'll give you try to give you a brief overview. I will try and discuss with you migration scenarios as I have them thought out. They are not complete scenarios, but it's giving you some food for thought on what you can expect when you are going through this process. So which steps are you going to take? What do you need to prepare and stuff like that? Then I would like to take you through the actual migration steps, so the technical migration steps, what's happening there and what's going on and what can you do there. And then I'll try and show you, especially when you have some time left, to give you a little demonstration and show you, yeah, in a very simple scenario, what this could look like. It's a very simplified scenario, but just to give you an idea. And at the end, we'll have a recap. And like I said, there will be plenty of room for questions. And please feel free to ask them in the Q&A section of the Zoom call. So I'll dive into the first topic then. What are the key differences in HANA View modeling between HANA 1 and HANA 2? So let me start by saying, okay, how do we build our views now? What do we use? Some of the stuff we mentioned we'll be familiar with, but just to give it to offset it against the new method. So in HANA 1, or in the classic way, we use HANA Studio for modeling. This has been around for years, and everybody's using that. Some people are using the workbench, but most people are using still HANA Studio, and it's a pretty good tool to work with. You can build your views either with or without a project. That depends on specific organization how they tend to work. But preferably, I do it with projects because it makes it more manageable for me. We are using classic database schemas, so it's normally just your regular schemas. And when you're building views, you're going to grant access to the sysrepo user with grant option, so that you can so that everything still works. Our views are currently located in packages, which you can find under content in your HANA Studio, and we consume our views through these packages or using sysbig, depending on what type of tool you use to connect to this system. And then we package them together in what we call delivery units. And these delivery units we transport from system to system, from development to test to production. And you can either do that manually or with tools like the HANA Application Lifecycle Manager or CTS Plus, or even in some situations, I know that customers are already using a tool like Jenkins. Well, this is what it is now. So if we're going to HANA 2, what will change? So how will we build our views in the near future? Well, we can do that exactly the same way, because with HANA 1, there is the XS Engine and XS Classic, which is still available in HANA 2. So if you move over, you can just upgrade your HANA 2 system without starting to use the new way of working. This could make your migration easier by saying, okay, we'll move to HANA 2 first, and then when everything is in place, we start with the new way of working. I've seen it happen at multiple customers already. They're already running HANA 2 on their systems, but still using the classic way of working. However, this is not the way we are going to build our views in the real future. Because, like I said, the classic way will be put out of, will be gone in a while. We don't know exactly when it will go, but SAP mentioned it already a couple of years ago. So we know it's on the way, and we have to prepare. So we have to start working in the new way. This is with the XSA engine, which is in HANA 2. What does that mean? That means that we're stop using HANA Studio, at least for most part, and we'll be starting using the SAP Web IDE, which is a full web interface in which we can build our HANA views and our other database artifacts. Instead of working with a project, we're now going to build an application, and that might be a mind shift for people that you're going to build an application, but it's just a term for it. It doesn't make it more difficult, but it's just a terminology. We're going to build a multi-target application, and for view building, we're only going to use the database part and the HDI containers, to which I will refer later. In HANA 1, we put all our artifacts in the HANA repository. It is still there in HANA 2, but it will also disappear in the future. In this place, we're going to use Git, which is a standard open source version control system. So this is a big difference already. Then on the database side, we're going to stop using, or at least we might still be using some classic schemas, but we will be starting to use HDI containers. What they are, I will try and explain later, but for now, let me say that you can only use the Web IDE if you're also going to use HDI containers. All your new views and new stuff that you're going to build will be put into HDI containers. Now, these are isolated artifacts which you have to grant access to and through. So if you want to access data from outside an HDI container, you have to create a user-provided services with roles and synonyms. I'm just mentioning it now, we'll explain it later. Another big difference is that the views that you're building are now located in the container itself. And when we're using what we're using now, the located in packages or you find them in this big schema. Now all views are stored in their own separate container. So one container for one set of views. And you're also going to consume these views through the HDI container. I have put /schema there as well because they present themselves as a schema, but that is where you're going to find your views and which you're going to use in your analytics packages. Then, like I said, the version control will be done using Git, and transportation will be done using Git. And for instance, a tool like Jenkins, which is an open source tool, is already being used it's immensely popular already with software developers, and for analytics developers, it's also now something that we need to look into. And I know already that large organizations here in the Netherlands are already using that. And to deploy your artifacts, you're going to use the command line, the XS command client with the XS deploy command, or you're going to deploy it through the SAP Web IDE. So that's quite a number of differences. But what does that all mean? Well, I've put it into three different sections. We've got the Web IDE, which will replace your HANA Studio. As you can see on the right with a little screenshot, you can see your projects on the left, your modeling in the middle, and your detail screens on the right. It's pretty similar to what HANA Studio provides, but it's fully web-based. So it's the new standard for views development. HANA Studio and the web-based development workbench have been deprecated, which means that they will still be supported for a bit, but no new features will be built into that, and they will go out of support. I don't know exactly when. We can look that up for you, but it will happen. So this will be the new way to develop your HANA views for analytics. It's a fully browser-based development environment. All your graphical and your HANA modeling tools are in there. As you can see, there are a few more than you have now in your HANA Studio. And like I said, the new features that SAP is providing for view and view modeling will no longer be available in HANA Studio, but only in the Web IDE. We're not modeling it in packages anymore, like I mentioned before, and this only works with HDI containers. So you cannot do, I don't know if that's a question, but you cannot do this SAP Web IDE without using HDI containers as well. And last thing I'd like to mention is that models that you have built in HANA Studio are not directly compatible with the SAP Web IDE. They need to be migrated. There's a special migration tool for this, or they have to be rebuilt. So this next slide is not something that is new, but I still thought I'd mention it. Certain view models, and I know a lot of customers are already stopped using it. But some kind of view, some views are no longer supported. So the attribute views for your dimensions, your analytic views for your cubes, your script-based calculation views, and also your XML-based classical analytic privileges are no longer supported in the Web IDE. This is something that's already been known for quite a while, but at least you know that these need to be migrated or replaced before you can start working in the new way. Then the HDI containers. Well, HDI is an abbreviation for the HANA Deployment Infrastructure. And when you look at the, it presents itself, like I said, as a schema, but if you're looking under the hood, it's actually a complete set of schemas. I won't dive deep into that unless you have any questions on that, but it's a service layer on the HANA database, which means that the container will be presenting itself as a service, and this is done because if you know, we're moving lots of things to the cloud, and everything is done containerized and service-based, and SAP's way is to deliver HDI containers, and they are presenting themselves as a service. So containers are buckets where with specific functionality. In our next slide, I will show you what that could look like. They are fully isolated, which means if you build a container out of the box, there's only one user that has access to it, and that's the owner or the technical user of the container. And only that user can access that container, and you have to open it up to the outside to make sure that people can access information that's contained in the container. And if you want to access data from outside the container, for instance, from a classical schema, you also have to set that up, and it's not available automatically. Great advantage, except for the isolation, which makes it more secure, is that every developer will get their own container. That means, for instance, if you're working on a specific set of views, you can do so without disturbing somebody else who is working on another set of views in the same container. But when everybody gets their own container, it makes it more flexible for development. There's one big challenge in analytics development, if I may say, that if you're having a big data warehouse and you put all your data in an HDI container and you will want to give your every developer their own container, then your HANA will fill up pretty quickly. So in our scenarios, we'll describe a way around that because that's not pretty useful. So a container does only, HDI container only contains database artifacts. So no other stuff, no JavaScript, nothing else. It's only database artifacts. So there's your tables, your views, your scripts, your roles, but that's it. That's the only part that's in it. And the container also contains both the design time artifacts. So when you're building them, you're scripting them. And when you've built them, they become runtime objects, and both of them are contained within the same container. So the container is focused on deployment only. So there is no version control available within the container. So if I change something within my container and I make a change and save it, then the other information is lost if I don't use version control. And version control, like I said, is done through Git. So this way of working is more flexible, but it also makes things a little bit more complex. Just a quick visualization of what this might look like. So if you're building an application, all your data stuff is in the HDI container, so your tables and views, and you've got separate containers for other things like programming languages. This means things can be deployed separately, but you have to build connections between the containers. So how does that work? Well, like I said, deployments are done using the HDI container. When a developer builds or creates a container, it is available to him only, or him or her only. So when development is done, you're going to deploy it. You make it generally available for other users to use. And all your runtime objects, like I said, reside in this HDI container in what we perceive as schemas. Now, if you want to access data outside this HDI container, first you have to provide access to the data outside. So like I mentioned before, you have to create a service, a user-provided service that provides access to, for instance, a classic database schema where all your data is stored. For instance, your data warehouse data is stored in a separate schema. You have to give that access. So you have to create a user-provided service. And within your HDI container, first you have to make that the container aware that that service is available to it. So you have to create a reference to it in a file called the mta.yaml, where MTA is for your multi-target application. And if I'm not mistaken, YAML means yet another markup language, but that's the file, a text file, which defines the access, or that defines the resources and the build which is done for this container. And you have to reference the outside service, for instance, the schema XYZ here in the image as a service that's available to this container. Then you have to grant access to that as well, because only saying, well, there's a service is not enough. You have to say, okay, these technical users that are in this container need to be granted access to what's in that service. We do that using an HTTP grant file, and you assign the privileges to what is in the other service to the technical user in the container. And to make it deployable and easy to use by easy to deploy, we're creating synonyms inside the container that reference the data in the service, so that if the service changes, we don't have to change all the views, for instance, that are using data from that service, but we only have to change the synonyms. So the synonyms refer to these objects that are outside of the container. So that's the HDI container. Then your version control using Git. Git is a distributed version control system. It's around since the beginning of Linux, where it's been developed by the same people who developed Linux. So it's been around for a while, and is used in software development. So our innovation team is using Git quite a lot for all the development tools, but we're now going to use that in our application or in our analytics development as well. So it's a standard, which is good to move away from the repository, and we're going to be able to use a standard way of version control. It is open source, and what's new to us is that every developer also gets their own Git repository where they can check in data. So your development is done in the container itself, but you can put your data and your versions into your own Git repository. So if you have your Git repository, that's your own personal version control system. But when you need to share that, there you can set up central repositories, so where you can check in and check out data and share your own developments with other people. So Git will replace the HANA repository. It's more flexible and more complex. I've been talking to people who are using Git, and it sometimes drives them crazy, but it is very powerful. And one last thing I'd like to mention, that Git is not the same as GitHub. People tend to somehow think that it is the same. Git is the version control system, and GitHub is a repository on the web which you can use as a central repository. So they're not the same thing. I have a tip here that there is a open SAP training called Cloud Platform Version Control with Git. It's a very, very good training which explains these functionalities quite clearly to you. So I would definitely, if you don't know anything about Git, to look into that. So how does that work? Just a quick little view. You create files or you modify them, but then you save them. So then you've got your saved changes. They are still in your container. Then you want to put them in a version control system. You have to stage them. And when you stage them, they are tracked changes that are going to be tracked by Git. And when you have staged them, you can commit them into your Git repository, so you can create multiple versions of your developments. Remember that when you commit your changes, you commit those to your local repository and not to the central repository, because that's a different step that's coming in as well. But I'm not going to do a complete course on Git. Like I said, I refer you to the course, but I definitely want to share this one with you. If you think Git is complicated, you are not the only one. I found this slide in the training course, and it goes from denial through anger because it's so complicated. Can I only use a couple of functions to totally depression? And then finally, when you get it, it is really a powerful development tool. So this is something you need to, within your organization, train your people for, because it is much more powerful than what we have now in HANA 1, but also much more complex. And then I have a slide on deployment here. So that's also a little bit different. Like I said, you develop your artifacts. When you've developed them, you build them into an application. So you generate the whole set of data into an application, which is then becoming a file, a mtar file, which I will show you later. And the build information and the version information are available in this file called mta.yaml, which I mentioned before. Like I said, this generates an mtar file, and this mtar file is something that you're going to deploy to another system or another space within the same system to make it generally available. So deployment makes the application generally available for people to use. So then it's no longer a development container for everybody. User has their own container. It's the general available single version of truth for available for everybody, if you've given them access, of course. You deploy applications to what we call a space. That's a XSA/Cloud Foundry term. So you can have an organization for which stands for your company that you work for, and you can have multiple spaces. For instance, a dev space, a test space, and a production space. So you can deploy the application to a development space or to a test space, wherever you want it, to make it general available within that space. To do this, you use the XS command line tool or XS deploy, and you embed this deployment in a pipeline tool. And I've mentioned it before, but Jenkins is the solution of choice. There are other systems available, but Jenkins seems to be the one that everybody is using. So if you don't know anything about this, this is also something you need to dive into. And one final thing for this is that you can do deployments directly from the Git repository using the deploy tool. So you don't have to do them from your web IDE. You can do them also directly from the repository itself. So to recap schematically, on the left side, we're using the catalog where the standard schemas are. We have a repository on top. The XS engine is for us less important, but it's still there. And on the right side, we have the catalog where the HDI containers reside. And instead of the repository, we're using Git. And in between, there are other containers for applications and stuff like that. So that's the key differences in HANA View Modeling 1 and 2. Elena, have there been any questions so far?
No, there are no questions. There's one comment from Bart. HANA Studio and repository will be supported until the end of HANA 2.
Okay. Well, that's kind of, thanks for that, Bart. It's kind of more like a statement instead of a question, but thank you very much for sharing that. If there are no questions, there's two possibilities. Either I am extremely clear or everybody is fallen asleep. I hope not. But then I will continue straight away to the next step, which is the migration scenarios and the process. Like I said before, I don't think I'm complete in this, but I just want to give you some food for thought in what things you want to look at when you're going to migrate from HANA 1 to HANA 2 with your modeling. First of all, I've I thought of a few possible migration scenarios. The first one I already mentioned. It's a scenario where you only upgrade your HANA system, so your HANA 1 to HANA 2, but still keep using the classic way of working, so the classic schemas for data storage, repository, HANA Studio, and business as usual. You can do that. It is a possible first step to make things easy, and first get that in place before you start the second part. And you start using the new way of working using XSA and the web IDE. The second scenario, which is a scenario which makes very much sense to me, and I think that is something that specifically in data warehousing and large data sets that people will choose, is that currently most of your data is already in classical schemas. And like I said, when you start developing your views, you're going to give every developer an HDI container. So if you put all your data, which is of course possible, you can put your data in those containers as well. But if your data sets are huge, then you have to create multiple containers with these huge data sets. And the only party that will love that is SAP, because they can sell you more licenses for HANA. But they tend to be very expensive, so that's not the way I think you should go. So I think you should keep your data in your classic schemas just as it is, so that everybody can share that. and use the HDI container just for logics, a view, and the consumption of your views. This way, there is no big data stored in your container, and all your logic can still be done within every developer's container. So it makes it much more flexible to use. In the future, there can also be hybrid scenarios when you start moving data to HDI containers as well. But in that case, you probably want to create a user-provided service on that to share that data with your HDI containers, which contain your views. Otherwise, you'll get the problem that I mentioned in the previous scenario. So you can use them both classic schemas and HDI containers for data storage, and use the HDI container for logic and views and consumption. But I think for most companies, scenario 2 is the most feasible because most data is already available in those classic schemas. So it makes sense to use that. Then the migration process itself. Very, very important step, preparation. Preparation is always important, but there is lots of things you need to think about when you start your actual migration process, even before you start anything technical. Sorry, just taking a sip. First, because it can be kind of a big project, depending on how many views you already have available and how large your system is. But this is a good point to determine which of the current views are actually being used by your end user. So it's a good moment in time to reflect and say, well, I've got 150 views or even more maybe. Large organizations will definitely have more, but I'm currently only using half of that. And sometimes you don't even know, but it is a good time to look at that and say, well, maybe I will only migrate the views that are actually used. It's a good point in time to do this. And then decide, like I said, which views are you going to migrate? Because if you don't use them anymore, you don't need to migrate them as well. It's a lot of work. So make sure you prepare for that. Then a very important thing, and I will explain it a little bit more after this because I've got some slides on this. You need to determine the complexity of your views. What this complexity exactly is, like I said, I will share later, but this is a very important step. Then you also need to determine whether you're going to migrate your views or whether you're going to rebuild or refactor your views. Migrating can be good, but some views may be so complex that you're not able to migrate them because the migration tool will tell you that, and then you have to rebuild or refactor that. So you have to make sure you know which ones you can migrate and which ones you need to rebuild or refactor. And another thing you need to think about upfront is currently you have a structure of packages, usually layered, and this will change because now you have to put all your views in one or multiple HDI containers, and you don't have these packages available anymore. So you have to say, how am I going to structure this? You can use namespaces within your containers, which you can use as a prefix before the actual artifacts in the container, but you have to think about this. So you have to, most companies have naming conventions in place, but these naming conventions need to be reconsidered and see if they still work or if they need to be changed when you're going to be using HDI containers and put your views in there. Then, of course, another important thing is in which order are you going to migrate your views? If you've got layered views, you of course have to start with the views that other views are depending on first. But also business priorities are important here. So determine which priorities, in which order and which priorities you give to the conversion process to which views. Then, as you've heard multiple terms coming, there's things you need to train yourself in. You have to be comfortable with how HDI containers work. They are not as easy as schemas, they are more flexible, but there is more technology below that, and you need to be aware of it. Not every developer does, but people in your organization who are going to maintain those containers or create those containers need to be trained to this. Also, like I said, Git, which is the version control system, but it's also something that is flexible, but also complex and can give you heartaches if you don't understand properly how this works. So think about doing some training. And I also said, don't forget the free open SAP training, which is very good. And I don't know if you need to be trained for the web IDE. I myself don't think it's very complex, but especially if you've been working with the HANA Studio before, but at least take some time to see what's different and make sure that people have the right knowledge to develop the views in the right way. Then you have to set up your environment. That's both on server side and on client side. On server side, you have to think about certain things. At least you have to think about, will I freeze my current development while I am going to do this migration? For instance, if you're migrating this, your views from 1 to 2, and in the meantime keep developing HANA views, HANA 1 views, in the meantime you're going to complicate your process as well, and you need multiple instances of your system to make this process feasible and possible for your organization. So you have to think about setting up temporary environments, which is much more easy nowadays with systems to speed up in the cloud. But you have to prepare these systems, and you definitely need a sandbox for the test migration, which is the next step, where you are going to create a user subset and do a test migration. More on that later. And then you have to configure your XSA environment. So you have to configure your XSA cockpit, you set up your organization and spaces, and also configure your web IDE and make users, create users and make it available for people to use. You also have to think about setting up your central Git repository. You can do that either in the HANA Cloud, or you can use other repositories in central repositories like GitHub or Bitbucket, where you can make it centrally available. You can also create it yourself in your own organization, but the HANA Cloud or the HANA Cloud Cloud platform and or the SAP Cloud platform, sorry, and GitHub and Bitbucket are very popular. And also you have to think about, especially when you're a larger organization, about your deployment infrastructure. This needs to be set up if you don't already have it in place. And I would definitely suggest you look at Jenkins for this. Then on the client side, do I need stuff there too? It's a web-based tool, yes. Maybe this is a no-brainer, but I've been to organizations where they are still using a very old web browser. Just make sure that a supported web browser is available for people who are going to develop in this with these tools. Then for deployment, you need to and for conversions you need to set up the command line client, which I will demonstrate in the demo. But you can use that for deployment, for creating spaces. Checking all your services. It's a very powerful tool. And you need the XS migration tool available, which is also a client tool. And I put it between brackets, but you still are very wise to keep HANA Studio present as well. Then the test migration. This is where you're going to do a migration of a subset of your views from all the different complexities that I mentioned, and I will go into after this. Why do you want to do this? Well, you have to make an estimate on how long your project will take, and if you divide things, your views into different complexities and pick a subset, you can get a good estimate of what you will encounter when you do the whole migration process. You also have to think about things not only like, does it work? Does it provide the same output as my HANA 1 views, but also think about performance. because HANA 2 and the way the optimizer works changes quite a lot. And that can have a pretty big impact on performance. So it's smart to, in your test migration, also see if the migrated views perform as expected, and if you need to, or if you need to go back to the drawing board to see what you can do. So the question is, do your assumptions that you've made during the preparation actually match the reality? If they do, great. If they don't, go back and see where you have to make changes to this. Well, the next two steps are very quickly go through, but it's the actual planning and execution of your actual migration, and make sure you have support and aftercare available. But these are more generic steps for migration process. These are kind of the steps for the migration process on a whole. Are there any? I don't see any questions in the Q&A, so I think I continue with the complexity of the views now. I don't hear any interruption from Eline, so I think that's fine.
No, no questions.
Okay, great. Everybody's still awake? I hope so. Well, the complexity of the views, where does this depend on? Well, the first thing you would think about is, okay, how complex is the view internally? Which queries are in there? Do I use functions? Do I use all kinds of stuff within the view itself? Yes, that is important, but it's not the thing that I would like to emphasize on in this migration process. What is also very important, maybe even more important, is how you packaged and layered your views. Most organizations have a data acquisition layer or a data integration layer, and on top of that, a data presentation layer. How these views are related and how they are packaged can have a big impact. Why is that? Because the XS migration tool is done on a delivery unit basis. So if you are migrating views that are in different delivery units and you cannot migrate them into the same package, that makes the complexity bigger. So these are the levels of complexity that I thought of. Maybe there are more, but these are the four that I could think of. So if you have all your views in one single delivery unit, I'm not going to say it's a walk in the park, but it's the easiest way to go. So that's a very easy way. So for smaller organizations, this would be the case. If you have multiple delivery units with views in each one of them, but if they're not related, also no problem. But then you get multiple views, multiple delivery views where the views are related and layered, and you have one responsible party. Well, the complexity increases because of the layering of the views and the relations and the order in which you have to convert these makes it more complex. And then the most complex one in my mind is where multiple parties within an organization are responsible for multiple delivery units. I have visualized this. So this is the easiest one. All the views are in one delivery unit, easy to migrate. Like I said, multiple delivery units, but no relations between them. They can be done in parallel without any problems. But when you get views that depend on other views, like here you have views in delivery unit 1 who depend on delivery unit 2, things get more complex. If you have one responsible party available for both delivery units, then you are fine. Well, it still is complex, but you have everything in one team who is working on that. But when you have multiple parties that are responsible, then communication starts to be a very important part. And you have to make sure that you do things in the right order, communicate clearly, and this makes the process challenging, let's put it that way. So those were the complexities.
There's now a question, Dick.
Yeah.
I think it's about a part before the complexity.
Yeah.
These steps are derived by real-time project movement, or is this a theoretical, semi-practical observation?
This is, for my part, I've created a small migration on a test system, Personally, I haven't done this in a large real-time project environment. I have colleagues who are working on that. These are the steps that I thought of that would make sense. Yeah, maybe you can think of more things, but like I said, it's more from my personal point of view and what I would expect that would happen if you're going to migrate these in these scenarios.
Okay, thank you. It was an anonymous question, so I don't know. I cannot ask if it was clear, but if not, then please put a new question in the Q&A.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. And then continue to the actual migration steps. Go back into this. Well, first thing you have to do is set up your XSA environment. I put in a little screenshot here of the HANA XSA cockpit, where you have to first set up things like organizations and spaces. As you can see here on the right, I've built my own organization, which is called Expertum. It's the company. And then within that, I have different spaces. One space called Dev, where some colleagues of mine are developing applications. I have got an HDO demo, which I'm going to use in our demo system. I've got a test and a production space. And I've got an SAP space, which is a standard space. And this way, you can separate your development and deploy to different environments within different spaces. These spaces, it's important to say, don't have to be all on the same machine, because you can, within XSA, connect multiple HANA systems into one XSA environment but use one web IDE for all and one XSA environment for all development. Quick mention of the SAP space. This is kind of a system space, and this contains actually applications like the web IDE, the XSA cockpit, scheduler, and all kinds of other functionalities that are default available out of the box to you. And then in the XSA, you can also see and create your user-provided services or see other services that are available. And also very important to mention, of course, you have to create users and roles within the spaces to give people access and to start building their artifacts. Then the actual migration itself. For this, you need the XS migration tool, which, like I said, you have to install on a client system. And the steps are like this. And I mentioned this one, the first step already before, and I'm not sure how many companies are still using these types of views, but first of all, you need to convert the old views, like the analytic views and the attribute views, to calculation views. This is something the XS migration tool can do for you. And this is the first step in the migration. And then what will happen is it will convert your delivery units into the XSA format, which is a zip file. And this zip file can be imported into your web IDE. Here you have to think, which delivery units am I going to combine into one zip file, because one zip file will become a project and a project will become an HDI container. That's why preparation is so important. The first step can be done in HANA Studio as well. If you still have analytic views and attribute views, there is a migrate option in HANA Studio. If you're in the modeling perspective, there's a migrate option on the right, and this helps you to migrate your analytic views and attribute views to calculation views. It also helps you with your analytic privileges to create SQL-based analytic privileges instead of XML-based. And the thing I'm seeing is that you have more control over this process, because if you're there are some command line options you can use for the migration tool, but it is in my opinion I feel more in control when I migrate these views in HANA Studio. Again, like I said, if you have already converted everything to calculation views, then fine, but this is the first step. One thing I'd like to mention as well, If you're using naming conventions, and most organizations do, for instance, start your analytic views with ANV and your attribute views with ATV and your calculation with CV. If you convert them, then the names will remain the same. And this can cause confusion because the XS migration tool converts them from attribute views and from and analytic views to calculation views, but the name will stay the same. So it can be called, for instance, ANV dot sales dot calculation view. So it is a calculation view, but the naming convention can still point to an analytic view. So beware of that. It can cause confusion, and it's something you need to be aware of. So like I said, preparation, convert the old schools in HANA Studio if you want, and determine which delivery units you want to combine into an HDI container. Then run the XS migration tool. It will generate the zip file. The zip file can be imported into the web IDE. And then if it's imported in the web IDE, you're not there yet, because then it is only in the XSA format, but you still need to configure the project in the web IDE itself. And there are quite a few steps here. I've listed them, but you will be able to get these sheets afterwards, I think. So you have to, if you work in HANA in web IDE, you create a project, which, like I said, will become a container. But you first have to, after you've imported the zip file, you have to assign the project to a space, which is usually the dev space. But anyway, you have to assign it, because if you don't, you cannot build it. You have to make sure that the user provided services for the data and the tables used outside your container are made available. So these user provided services need to be built. Then you have to make these user provided services available in the HDI container itself, like I mentioned before in a previous slide. So add UPS as a resource, build that, adjust or create the UPS in the HTTP grants file for the technical user, and also create synonyms to actually access those external objects. These files are generated for you. You just have to make sure that they point to the correct UPS, user provided services. Then you can build your views. And when I say build is the term now being used in Web IDE, which is similar to what we call activate in the HANA views. So when I say building, you can think of it as activating your views. Think about dependencies, do it in the right order. You can try and build them all at the same time. It does sometimes work, but it sometimes also doesn't work. So I would suggest you do it in the right order. Then the default roles that are available, you can adjust and create. You can create them or adjust the available roles that are there. To provide access to the users for outside the container. So for instance, for your reporting user. You then deploy it. And then, of course, you have to grant access to the user by either using the quite interesting set of SQL stored procedures that SAP has provided now. It's a nice, interesting document to read, the HDI reference guide. But you can also use the grant statement if you are using a role. Thanks for an anonymous colleague of mine who helped me to put this in at the last moment. So when you've done that, then you can access your views. So this is in high level the process of how this process works. So before I go to a little demo, I think there is a view or maybe a question in the Q&A.
Yeah, there's one question still open. What happens if custom views are based on standard SAP HANA live views? Mm-hmm. How do we convert them?
That's a good question. SAP is not, I don't have heard anything that HANA Live is going to be converted to HDI containers, but you can create user-provided services to access those HANA Live views in your HDI container. So you don't actually convert the HANA live views, but you can, if you have built custom views based on the HANA live views, then you have to create a user-provided service that accesses those base views and create the custom views within the container. And in this way, you can access the HANA live views from your custom views in the HDI container.
Okay. Another question is popping up.
Yeah.
As I understood, each developer has his own HDI container for artifact he's working on. Is it possible to work on objects with multiple developers before deploying them?
Yes, but not the same time. So you cannot work in the same container at the same time. You can work in your own container, make the changes there, then use Git to put them into your repository and put them into the central repository, and then the other colleagues can use that changes you've made as well. And the Git system will help you to, if there are any collisions or changes, the Git system will help you to work on this.
Okay, a lot of questions now popping up. Would you advise to do a migration over a long time? So install XSA next to XSC and then take 1 or 2 years to move all things over?
Good question. I think there is no right or wrong here. You could run these two environments next to each other, so there is no reason why you shouldn't do it in parallel. However, if it takes a long time, then yeah, a project that runs a long time is not something you really like. So I would rather do it in one go. But it is definitely possible to do it in a longer process. If, for instance, you don't have the resources to do it in a short time, then it is possible to do it in a longer process. But then, yeah, like I said, you would be in the process all time, and you would be supporting two types of environments at the same time, which might not be something that you would like to do. So
I think it's also really depending on how your system structure looks like.
Yes.
Yeah. There was one more question, but that was more about like a general about the training. So I will move that to the end of the session.
Yeah.
So if there are no other questions popping up now, so then we can move. Oh, sorry. whether the access to Cloud Foundry to be given to every developer in big organization. Maybe you should read it.
Yeah, I have see what you mean. You have the access to Cloud Foundry. It's like you mean XSA probably, but XSA is kind of a Cloud Foundry implementation within HANA 2. So if you want to be a developer, then every user should have their own user within XSA. Because if you're going to share users, you cannot work on the same things at the same time, because then I think unexpected things will happen. So I think the answer to this question is yes. Every developer needs their own access to the XSA environment.
Yeah, so I think you can continue to the demo.
How am I for time? Oh, okay. Still got some time.
I think there's plenty of time for the demo.
Good. Now I'm not going to say I'm going to, no. Let's hope the demo goes right. I'm going to get some stuff ready, so please bear with me for a bit. Just move some windows over on my second screen. See. Okay. So I have built a small demo for you. It's based on the S-Flight dataset, demos dataset from SAP. So what I did is I created a classical schema S-Flight, and I put a few tables in there with some data. And then, like you can see here on the left side, here is the HANA Studio. I've built a project for this. I've got some analytic views, some attribute views, calculation views. These top ones I am not going to use in the demo. I'm going to use these two. I've got an I for integration layer and a P for presentation layer. And what I've done is I've created a few views, a few calculation views, and a few attribute views and an analytic view, which are in the I package, and a P package containing the graphical flights view, where I use views from this package. And good to know is that I've got two delivery units. I've got one delivery unit for I, and I've got one delivery unit for P. Well, not to complicate things, I didn't put any analytic privileges or roles in there. I kept security out of the demo and out of the presentation, because that is a topic that could fill up an entire different presentation. But this is what I have as a starting point. Like I said, I've got two delivery units, one for the I and one for P. And now I've already got some stuff installed. Like I said, this is not a Windows system, it's a Mac, but you can also do this, of course, on your Windows PCs as well. Let me see, where am I? Yeah, I am in my demo folder. I've got a few files here. And first of all, I am going to not do the analytic view and attribute view migration in HANA Studio. I'm going to do that with the Access Migration tool. So I am going to a directory I've got here called Access Migration. And then I'm going to run this command. Oh, I'm very lazy. I have typed it in already, so I'm going to copy and paste it. So this is the command I'm going to run. It's the Access Migration tool, which you can download from SAP. And I have here a few parameters. The first one is the name of the zip file. So it's going to be called demo_sflight. And I'm going to put it in a directory above this Access Migration directory called demo_sflight. It's just a folder, which I almost forgot to delete from the server. So that's what I'm going to do first. Sorry. No. This is a demo. Things can go wrong. There we go. This was from a test session. So now I'm going to do it again. So I'm going to put the output in a directory called demo_sflight that shouldn't exist. So that's why I deleted it. Otherwise, we could have gotten an error in the migration. I say put it in a zip file, and then I put in the two delivery units which I want to create into an HDI container. So I use both the integration layer and the presentation layer in one container. This is a very simplified scenario. In other scenarios that might be more difficult, but this is how I chose to do it for the demo purposes. So I have to type in my password. I already configured the tool, by the way, so there are some configuration steps, but for demo purposes, I skipped this. So like you see, this is now going to run some scripts. It's logged into the system and it found two delivery units needed. It's now looking at some synonyms. It's collecting the packages. It's looking, saying, okay, there is a lot of objects standard in the system, but there is about 71 design time objects found. And now it's migrating all these objects from the XS Classic way of working into the XSA way of working. Like you see, I've got some warnings. That's just a Java thing for my Java runtime, so you can ignore that. And you can see here it picked up a number of files, number of calculation views here, table function as well. It says there are no flow graphs to migrate, and it is finished. So it has now migrated the data into this demo S-Flight directory, which I will go into to give you just a quick peek on what that looks like. So as you can see, there is a zip file. I said it would be a zip file. I wanted a zip file, and then also what is in the zip file is also here in some folders. So you've got a DB folder, which contains the migrated artifacts. You've got the migration folder, which contains the original files, so the unmigrated files just for reference. You've got an mta.yaml file, like I said, the basis for your project. And you've got a file called report.html. Now, this report.html gives you insight in how the migration process went. But this is what the migration file looks like. And for each file, you can see, okay, what has happened, which files have been converted. In this case, there are no problems and no issues that have arisen. But if you are doing this in a non-demo way, you will definitely see, for instance, some views cannot be converted, and then it will warn you about those, that you need to do manual steps for those if you want to be successful in your migration. I get one warning here. It tells me that the security concept between XS Advanced and XS Classic are incompatible. I didn't have any roles in them, but it just warns me that that it's required to set up some security for this. But this is, things have gone well. And you see that it has created a project called Demo S-Flight, and it used 2 delivery units here from 2 packages with 25 objects. So this is a feedback on how the migration really went. There are some log files as well, but this is a very good step to go. So then I am going to go back to my command line, and I'm now going to use the XS command line client, which is the tool that can talk to the XSA environment. And if I run XS without a parameter, you can see that there are lots of commands that you can use here. Log in, log out, things related to applications, to services, organizations and spaces. I won't dive into this, but a helpful thing is if you can use XS help and then the name of the command. That way you can learn more about what's going on. First of all, I'm going to see in what space I am. I am already logged in, so I can use the T command, XST, which says, okay, you're currently in the login with the XSA admin user on this system. The organization is Expertum and the space is HDI demo, and this is exactly the space I want to be in for my demo, so this is fine. Now, normally I would create a user-provided services here. I can do that in the web IDE as well, but I prefer myself to use the XS command client. I'm not going to, I have done that already, and mainly because there is a password in there, and I didn't want to share that with you. But if I use the XSS command, which is for XS services, it's a shortcut, I can show you that there is a service already available. This is a user provided service. You can see that here in under the service column, and it's called S-Flight-Granter. So this service provides access for every container that uses it to the S-Flight schema, the classic S-Flight schema I created in HANA Studio, where the data resides. So now I'm going to the web IDE. Here. So I can close this one here. And log in with my user. And this thing is in the way. Can I move this? Yes, I can. There we go. Refresh that. Come on, you can do it. So here's my empty web IDE. So this is what's going to replace your HANA Studio. So this is your development space. On the left side, in your workspace, you see your projects. There's no projects there yet. Here on the right will be the space where you build your views. Here on the bottom will be the feedback from the system. And here on the right, there are some other things, for instance, like this is where you integrate with your Git repository. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import the file I just generated. So the converted migration part. So I'm going to get the file. Let's see. I'm going to open it. I put it selected. And then it says, where do you want to import it? So what is the name of the project going to be? And I'm going to leave this at demo S-Flight. I also want to extract the archive because I don't want just a zip file there. I want the contents of the zip file there. So it's now importing this file. And as you can see here, you can see the folder structure that I showed you from the migration. So here's the DB folder, which contains the artifacts that have been migrated. This is the original one. So here is the old analytic views still there. As you can see, they're still called analytic views. This is just for reference purposes. You cannot do anything with this. So if you have done migrating, you can delete this migration folder. So I've imported the zip file. So I'm going to the source directory of my DB module. So because I'm going to create a DB module, that's what this is called. And here are all the things I have built. And here you can see that the analytic views and the attribute views have been converted. And you can see that they are calculation views now. But you can see they still have the old prefixes. I just wanted to keep this here to show you that this is what happens when you use the XS migration tool. So now I have to do some steps first. First of all, I have to create or have to assign this project to a space. I do that in the project settings. And in the project setting, there is an option called space. And here you will see all the spaces where this user has access to. Well, this user doesn't have that many spaces. It just has the HJ demo space. And it also says there is already a builder installed, and the builder is the tool, the application that you use to build your and to activate, let's call it that way, your artifacts. So I'm going to save that and close that. And now I'm going to use the user-provided service. I'm going to connect that to the system. Like I said, it's called S-Flight. Just for my reference, Eline, is this a bar that I'm seeing on my screen also visible for you, or is that only with me?
Which bar are you talking about?
Oh, here on the bottom I have the. I moved the dock, the Zoom dock around a bit.
No, okay. I don't see it.
Okay, good. So as you can see here, the S-Flight grantor service is here. So I'm going to use this service in my definitions. So how am I going to do it? The first step I needed to do was go to the mta.yaml file. I can open that with the MTA editor, which is fine, but I prefer the code editor because it's more visible to me. This may look difficult. You have to get used to this. This is what you need to dive into. This is a file that defines what the application you are building, the MTA, the multi-target application is look like. It's built up of modules. In this case, there's only one module. It's called the demo flight, the S-Flight DB. So it's a database module. And for our demo purposes, this makes sense. But you could also add other modules in there for Node.js and other stuff, but we're not going to do that. And in this case, this HDI container module requires two other services. It requires the demo S-Flight HDI container, which is the connection to HANA, the container we're going to build. And it uses the grantor service, but you can see that by default, it's called synonym grantor service. I'm going to replace that with the name I'm using. I makes it more clear for me. So I'm saving the file. And now if I build the project, MTI, the information is available for everything. I'm not 100% sure that this needs to be done, but I usually build stuff when I've changed them to see if the syntax is correct, etc. So now that we have altered the YAML file, we have to go into the grants file to make this available in the system. And here I'm also going to be, just for my own clarity, call it as flight granter. And I open this, and this is where the container, this is the grant where the technical user of the container, there's two users, the object owner user and the application user, get access to the data in the container. So I have to change this service name as well to the sFlight granter, otherwise I will get an error. And you can see that there's tables called scar in the sFlight schema. The object owner gets the privileges select option with grant option, and the usual, the application user just gets normal select user. So I save this HTTP grant file, but if I would do that, that would get a mistake. There's a, oh no, that's not in this one. Sorry, that's in the synonyms. Sorry, so I have to save this. And I'm going to create the service. As you see at the moment, there is in my HDI demo space, there's only the user provided service. And if I'm going to build this one, oops, it's always nice. Service grantor service not, oh, it's always nice when something goes wrong in your demo. Let me see. How am I for time? Yeah, I have to restart this because I made a mistake. I imported the wrong file. Have I got time to start over, or should we do? Should I finish the presentation first and then go to the demo for the people who want to stay?
Maybe we can have a short moment if there are open questions that people want to ask now.
Yeah.
Currently, there are no questions, so then.
What I'll do is I'll go back here.
Otherwise, you finish your presentation and then you can always do the continue with the demo again.
That's what I was intending to do. So I'm recapping now because based on the presentation. Why should you migrate to HANA 2 for modeling? So the XSA way. Well, the first one is not the one you really want, but it's because you have to. The old method will be phased out in newer HANA versions, so you have to do it. If not now, you have to do it in the future. So you have to start at least thinking about it, but you have to. Another reason, which is more positive, or depends on how you look at it, new features that are being developed for HANA modeling are only available in the web IDE. So for instance, anonymization or different types of views that are available in the web IDE are not available in the classic way of working. This way, because it's fully containerized, this new way of working is also cloud proof because it can be deployed to Cloud Foundry environments and cloud containers. Because of the containerization, this is also a positive. HDI containers is also an advantage if you want every developer to have their own environment. It has some challenges too, but it's also more flexible. You're using the standard-based version control system from Git, which is good. It's more powerful. And also, you're never going to migrate to HANA 2 only for the modeling function. So there must be There are other reasons to move to HANA 2, which is also a reason why you should move there and go to this as well. But your new software SAP versions are going to ask for HANA 2 in the future, or now maybe already, I don't know. As well, support for new hardware, for instance, is only available in HANA 2. So these are quite reasons to go to HANA 2 modeling, at least in the near future. Think about it and start your migration process. So to recap, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So you have to migrate. So don't wait until the last moment, because it might take some time for you to get this right, especially if you're a larger organization. So don't wait until the last moment and you run out of maintenance. There is no SAP Web IDE without the HDI. So you cannot only have the Web IDE and not have HDI. That's just not possible. As you may have noticed by now, it's not as simple as 1, 2, 3. It's not a simple migration. So it takes some time. You have to really make a project for this, whether you do it in one big bang or do it in a phased way, like the question said. Can I do it in 1 or 2 years? You can, but take into account your maintenance and stuff like that. Pick a scenario. The scenario, like I said, the most feasible scenario is the second scenario presented with the data in classic schemas and the views and other artifacts in HDI containers. Preparation and testing is everything. So make sure you do your test migration and prepare well, learn lessons, and make sure that everything is at least tested properly with the different complexities before you start the actual migration path. Don't forget the training, like learning to use Git and the HDI containers, to how that works. It's pretty important that you know how it works. And the last one, beware of the complexity in the views. Like I said, if you have relations between views and stuff like that, things can get complex pretty easily. So that's the recap. Thanks for attending. I will try and get the demo up and running. If you want to see that, please stick around. If there is any more questions, we can do that now. And of course, during the demo, of course, or after that, I'll also have some more time. But that's about it.
There was one question that I left for the end. Yeah. But that was more actually on your own experience. And that was actually the experience. Are you having experience with using HANA Express or HANA Cloud Trail? I think this is someone wants to learn this all. And what are the major other resources for using and doing this practically?
Very good question. It reminds me of something I forgot to mention. There is, of course, different versions. HANA Express. I haven't tried this with HANA Express, but I assume this should be able to be done in HANA Express as well. I'm not 100% sure on the limitations on that, but it should be possible. What you should be aware of is that SAP has now available multiple offerings of where you can use HANA. For instance, a colleague of me mentioned that they're working with HANA Cloud at a customer, and there are differences between the different HANA versions. The HANA version I was using and are going to use in a demo is HANA 2 SP4. Which is an on-premise, or it is in a cloud environment. It's like an on-premise situation. When you use HANA Cloud, certain features that are still available in HANA 2 are not yet available in HANA Cloud. So you have to be careful there. You can get a demo environment for HANA Cloud for a while as well. So you can test there, but certain things work differently there. Under the hood, HANA Cloud has version 4.0. So that should tell you that there is differences between the version I'm talking about, version 2, and the cloud version. So that's something to be aware of. What was the second part, Alina, again? I forgot the second part of the question.
The second part of the question is, what are the other major resources used for learning and Yeah, for learning.
Well, I have there is an interesting number of blogs available at SAP at the blogs.sap.com. There have been some very good blogs, very interesting. Also, there's also on YouTube there is some SAP videos available as well. There's one very interesting video I like very much by Thomas Young on how HDI admin works with regards to, for instance, security, or a topic I didn't cover. I have a list of articles and things I used while collected while preparing for this session, which I am willing to share as well with the attendees. So maybe I can put that in as a list of links in the slides as well before we distribute those. Maybe that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. There are no other questions, so yeah, I think that we can just round off now, and that you can continue with the demo for the people that are interested.
Yes.
I see a comment from Dennis in our chat that the last name in the MTA YAML file was not changed. So
did I forget something? Oh, I'm sorry.
You can see it in the chat.
Oh, let me check.
In the chat of this Zoom, yeah. In the below bar below or in the side panel.
Ah, yeah. Well, thanks, Dennis. It's probably you're probably right, but I was too hasty already. I already deleted the project, so I'm going to do that again. Thanks for your input. But to anyone who says that they don't want to attend the demo, thank you very much for attending. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, and I'll try to answer you through email or to the channels. My email address is in the slides. And if you had any questions, please feel free, like I said, to contact me. We would like to, or we could set up a session or something like that. So please do that. And thank you very much. For everybody who's sticking around, I will continue with the demo and hope I get it to work this time. So I have to go back into the project settings, change my space, then go to the MTA YAML. This was S-Flight Granter. Oops. S-Flight Granter. Oops. So I'm going to change these. So then, was this the one I forgot, Dennis? Probably. Save it. Yes. It's nice to have you around, Dennis, especially when you're muted. Sorry, couldn't help myself. So this is the MTA YAML. So I'm going to build this one. Let me get my list back. So that is my MTA YAML file. Now I have to go to my grants. Rename these as well. And open the file. I have to give this right here. This is where we grant the access to the service to the technical user. Here. Build this one. So now it's completed successfully. And like I said, the first you saw only the S-Flight Granter available as a service in this environment. And now you can see that it has created an HDI container. You can see it's a HANA service, and you see that it is a made-up name. You can see it's the first one is my username. Then there is some GUID. It has some other things that gets this together. And this way, it distinguishes different version of that specific container for all the different users that are using this or want to use their own container or version of this project. When you're going to deploy this, this name will be much more readable, or you can make it at least much more readable. So let me see, where was I? So we have now to go to the service, the user provided service is now available. I have now to create the synonyms. So I will rename this one as well. Oops. Enter. Then go to my actual synonyms file, which is here in my source directory. I can open this in the synonym editor and then the code editor. I'm going to rename it first. And I will open it in the synonym editor first, so it makes it's much more easy to use. So here is the synonyms that are being used in the converted views. These are the, but they point to nothing yet. So what I would now have to do is pick up the objects from the user provided service to make them available. So I have the connection. I can do that also in the code editor. And why am I doing that? Again, I said I am a lazy guy. So I'm going to copy that in. So if I now open it in the synonym editor, you can see that it now points to the SCAR table in the S-Flight schema, and this S-Flight schema is made available through the user provided service. So I can now build this synonyms to see if I don't have make any mistakes. No, this is going right. So you can see it now, instead of pending deployment, it's now available. And now I can go into my folder, my I folder where my integration layer is, and I can activate all these objects, but I can also activate the folder. So it will now build all the views in the integration layer. And then also do the same with the one view that is in the presentation layer. And you might be wondering, what's the second file doing there? Calculation view properties. If you have multiple languages that you want to use in your calculation view, your properties file can be used to make headers and stuff available in multiple languages. So this is what you can use your properties file for. So this has been built. So now the container itself is, the views are available, everything is working. So if I, for instance, go into the Database Explorer, oh, I don't want to go here. I want to create a new connection to my just created container. And I go to column views. You can see the column views are now available. And I can open the data and view them. But this is only available within the container itself. I cannot access this from outside the container. So I go back from the Database Explorer to the Web IDE. And I'm now going to use one of these generated roles for me. And I'm going to rename it because it has a TXT extension, but I want to have it as the HTTP role. I'm now going to open this. And this is not going to work out of the box because it kind of thinks that two table functions that I've created are views as well, and they are not. So I have to replace this with some other code. which goes here. Saying it's a function and that it's not select, but you want to execute it. So I can build this role. Oops. Always nice when something goes wrong. Oh, I already see it. There it is. Copied a little bit too much. So now my role is available. So now I've got my own developer container with the role defined. And I can of course grant access people to my own specific container, but this is not what we want. So we want to now deploy it, and to do that we have to create an mtar file. So we're going to build the total project, and then you maybe already have noticed a folder here called MTA archives, and in this MTA archives folder you see now there is a demo sflight folder and there is the mtar file. So this file is now the total build version of this project, which I can now deploy from here if I want, but I don't like doing it here because I don't have as many options. So I'm going to export it. So it's now downloaded to my system. I have to now copy it over. And now I'm going to use the XS command line tool again. And I'm going to show you one thing. It's why I'm doing this, because you can influence how things are deployed. In the web IDE, I can just say, I want to deploy this to a space. But over here, I can use a file with the MTA ext extension, which I'm going to show you. Which contains some data where I can overwrite files of information that is stored in the container itself. For instance, what I've chosen to do here is, instead of using the demo sflight as the schema name, which was the default, I've added a $space variable here, which will add the name of the current space where we deploy to the name of the schema when I deploy it. So I'm going to run, let me see, oh, this is annoying. You don't see this, there we go. I'm now going to deploy, and this is deploying, because I am in the HDI demo space, it's going to deploy it in this space. So you can see it's deploying in the organization Expertum to the space HDI demo. You can also see there is no previous deployment available. If it would be, it would update it. But it now says it's the initial deployment, and it's creating a service now, an actual generally available service for the HDI container. It creates an application, and the application is only the container for everything. So it will not be active, and I will show you that if we have still got time for that. It's now uploading the application to the server, and now it's going to, it has staged to the server, and now it's going to deploy it in a bit. Yeah, it says execution status succeeded. So if I clear my screen now and I do XSS, you will now see that there is now an official service HDI container available with a much better readable name than the previous one. And this one is also bound to an application. So that this means this is the official deployed version of this container. So we have now deployed this container to the space HDI demo. So now the final thing we have to do, and we can do that in HANA Studio for easy. We're going to see and refresh this. you see that there is now a role available. One in the top one is my developer container, but the below one you can see at the schema name, it created demo sflight_HDI demo, where I showed you in the ext file that I put the space in there. It did that automatically for me. So I have to now grant this role to a user, and I've created a report user for this. So I'll open the user. And I will now say demo sflight. I will look up the role. I'll pick up the right one. And I activate this. So this user now has this specific role. So now I can go to the report user and refresh. And you can see the schema demo sflight HDI demo is now available to this user. And instead of going to the package or syspick, you can go to column views now, and you can see that these views are now available. So if I do a data preview, you can see that this is now consumable for this reporting user, and you can use this view now in your reporting tools. So kind of that concludes the demo. I hope this was a little bit clear. Are there still any questions left?
No new questions.
So good. Well, then I would like to really thank everybody for sticking around, for attending this session, HANA 1 to HANA 2. Thank you, Dennis, do the demo once more. If you want, I can do it especially for you, Dennis. But all the rest, thank you very much for joining. I hope you learned something here and it gives you new insights to start your own project. And please let us know if we can assist you with anything on that, or contact me through email or any of my colleagues. Thank you very much.